Welcome to Crossroads. The Supreme Court heard the long-awaited case on the legality of President Donald Trump's tariffs. Are they legal? Are they not? Do we have to give everybody refunds? Well, guess what? The decision actually fell somewhere in the middle. And Trump is taking this as an opportunity, not a loss, and he's actually expanding the tariffs using other methods. Now, like another topic, the Trump administration is not just targeting criminal aliens and focusing on deportations and going after them. They're actually working on legal immigrants also. And the administration is working to denaturalize people who they say defrauded the United States in the process of becoming citizens, and is going after other people as well. I'll be getting into it. Also, another topic before January 6th, well, there was Russiagate. Trump, Russia, Russia, Russia. And a key case in that case, well, it's actually going to the Supreme Court. I'll be talking about these topics a lot more today, as well as answering your questions. So make sure to hit the like button. I'll be reading the chat as we go, so leave any comments, questions in the chat. Let's get started. Now, first of all, President Trump has basically found a little workaround to a Supreme Court ruling. Let me explain. The Supreme Court heard the long-awaited case on the legality of President Donald Trump's tariffs, and the decision from the court kind of went somewhere in between. They didn't fully rule in his favor. They didn't fully rule against him. Trump is basically saying this is actually great. It's better for him. Is he just saying that? I don't know. But he's basically saying because it clarified what is legal and not, he can now use effectively legal methods to do even more than he was doing before. And he's actually using this now to expand the tariffs. And as this happens, the other side is saying, well, you know what? Maybe we'll do something too. And there's questions now over whether the United States could be forced to pay back all the money to companies and countries and whatever else that we've gotten from the tariffs. Epoch Times says this. It says the White House on Sunday signaled it is waiting for the courts to issue guidance on whether tariff-related refunds are to be sent out after the U.S. Supreme Court struck down a number of the administration's import levies last week. It notes an interview on Sunday with ABC News. It says U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer was asked about the Trump administration's plans, and here's what he said. He said, well, we need the court to tell us what to do, meaning it has to go through court. He says they've created a situation where they struck down the tariffs and gave zero guidance on this. Now, you tell us this week, again, you're talking like ABC News. What's really going on here? The court did not fully strike down the tariffs. What they struck down was one particular rule. The issue they have is there are many rules around tariffs. They went after one, but a lot of others are still available. And this is kind of where things are at right now. Meaning, well, yeah, the Supreme Court struck down the use of one in particular. It doesn't mean the tariffs are gone. And so when he's talking about zero guidance on this, in my personal take, what he's talking about is zero guidance on how to handle money that was, again, taken through tariffs based on that one law. The real issue is whether, again, legally the Trump admin could say, well, yeah, money taken through this law, but technically we're using this one. It has to go to court to see if we have to give refunds, but the tariffs are still very much in place. He says this as well. Historically, as a trade attorney, in my experience, courts will normally give you some instruction on what to do when. He's basically saying, the courts kind of left us hanging. Now, notice this. In a 6-3 ruling on February 19th, the Supreme Court did not provide guidance on whether the Trump administration would need to provide refunds, and if so, if the repayments should be sent to companies or countries like Canada or India or the United Kingdom or any of the other ones, which is literally just about every country on the face of the planet being charged tariffs right now. Now, it says the ruling stated that the imposition of the tariffs under the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, this is the IEEPA, were unconstitutional. Let me explain this a bit briefly. Now, they had used this 1977 Act, the IEEPA, basically saying this, that the President of the United States can use this unilaterally, I'm the supreme leader in this regard, to do what he wants when it comes to trade deals. Congress has been saying, no, this is a budget issue, it has to go through Congress. The budget has to be approved by Congress, obviously. And so Congress, well, Democrats mostly, were saying that, this is our power. How dare the president take it? This is not something the president of the United States can just bypass Congress on. The Supreme Court actually agreed against Trump on this. The IEEPA is unconstitutional when used solely by the president. He has to go through Congress, and he was not. The issue is the IEEPA is just one of many tariff laws, which I'll get into in a minute. And Trump is basically saying, look, whatever you want to call it, whether you want to call it this one or section whatever of this other law, I have a lot of options. We were just using this one because it was one of the options on the table. Now, notes this is after President Donald Trump last year used the law to impose import duties on trading partners. It notes in a dissenting opinion, Justice Brett Kavanaugh chided the justices who formed the majority opinion for dodging the refund issue, writing, quote, "The court says nothing today about whether and if how the government should go about the returning of billions of dollars that it has collected from importers." Now, Trump has noted, first of all, we're swimming in cash. He's saying we have so much money, we don't even know what to do with it. So much money that we can build back the country. So much money we're actually paying off the interest on debt, which we basically never do. He's saying it's a great thing. The problem is if we have to give all that money back, Trump is saying, and he's probably right, it would crash the economy. If you have to give back hundreds of billions of dollars and then probably be sued on damages in addition to that, this would kind of bankrupt the United States. Now, the Supreme Court deciding not to rule on that, I don't know, was that a constitutional decision? What is a, hey, let's not destroy America decision? I don't know. In my personal take, what you're likely going to have, though, is you are going to have a lot of countries and businesses filing lawsuits on this. Because what they're saying now is that's not off the table. It actually has to go to the lower courts, and that will probably go back to the Supreme Court eventually. But it has to go through the lower courts. It's not clear whether this is going to be a retroactive ruling, meaning, pay back everything that was taken, or a going forward type ruling, meaning, hey, my bad, we won't do it again, but you're not getting your money back. We'll have to see how that goes. It says this, though. Also on Sunday, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was asked in an interview with CNN about what the administration plans to do in light of the Supreme Court's decision, including on whether any refunds are being considered. It notes the U.S. government collected $133 billion in IEEPA tariffs as of mid-December 2025. Roughly the equivalent of 1.3 Somali scam rings over the course of 10 years. Quite a lot of money. Here's what he said in response. So he said, quote, "The Supreme Court did not even address that," Bessent said, referring to the refunds, and added the Supreme Court remanded it down to a lower court. Again, meaning it's not off the table that we might have to pay that back. They might actually have to pay it back. But again, the lower courts will decide it. My personal assumption is it'll probably have to go back to the Supreme Court eventually. But he said this, and we will follow what they say, but that could be weeks or months when we hear from them. Meaning this discussion is not over. Almost without a doubt, companies and countries will be suing the United States. And based on those lawsuits, it probably will go back to the Supreme Court. As Bessent is saying, it could take weeks, it could take months. We'll have to wait and see. It notes as well that refunds are not up to the administration. It is up to the lower court. Let's just be clear on that, Bessent said. This is going to be a big deal. If America has to pay it back, that's a lot of money to pay back. We'll see how they deal with that. Would $133 billion crash our economy? If you had to pay it back immediately, it probably would. I would assume if they did have to pay it back, it would be over the course of 10 years or something else. It would hurt us without a doubt. It would really hurt the United States. My personal assumption would also be that President Donald Trump would look to offset that cost using other tariffs, ironically. If you want to ask me what my take on how this would look, what this would look like as it unfolded, it would be this. Let's say, for example, Canada wants the money back on the 10, 20, 30% tariffs Trump is talking about. Goes to a lower court. The judge says, yes, Donald Trump was wrong. He stole this money from you. He bypassed the powers of Congress, and he did not have the power to do it using this law. And let's say, for example, maybe the Supreme Court even rules in their favor. They appeal it, it goes there. Bam, give back the money, America. $133 billion to every country that was taken from, again, combined, right? What happens then? What do you think Donald Trump would probably do? Knowing Donald Trump, my personal assumption, this is me just reading the tea leaves, my personal assumption would be Trump would do this. He'd say, okay, Canada, you want to sue us for, let's say, I don't know, $10 billion, $20 billion. Well, I can't use the IEEPA for tariffs, but guess what? I have like 5 other rules that let me use tariffs. And the Supreme Court just clarified this, and so I can do it. What do you think Trump would do? Do you think he would just pay like $30 billion and just let it slide? No, I don't think so. I think he would match the cost of the tariffs, match the cost of the lawsuits, match the cost of what was taken using other tariffs. I would actually bet money on this, that Trump would do that. And guess what? There are some pretty big loopholes in the ruling that would allow him to do that. And guess what? He's literally already doing it. Let me show you this, okay? First off on the rule, this is what the Heritage Foundation said. Stefan Padfield, a principal of the Free Enterprise Initiative at the Heritage Foundation and senior legal fellow, made the following statement, quote, President Trump imposed across-the-board tariffs to get countries that impose trade barriers against American companies and workers to come to the table and is negotiating tariff and trade deals on a country-by-country basis. And this is a good reminder, briefly too, to clarify what is happening. It's not that, pirate President Trump is just robbing the world of all their tariff money and putting it in treasure chests in the backyard of the White House. No. It's actually that other countries have been basically pirating and robbing the United States with bad trade deals, tariffs, trade barriers, fines, and everything else, levies, the whole 9 yards. And what America's doing is equal to basically balance out what other countries have been taking from us using these various procedures. Now, some would argue that Trump's tariffs exceed what would the deficit or whatever be. You can judge it as is. They did release the math on this, and it's pretty complicated stuff, but they did show the math on how they calculated it. And effectively, these are, in fact, reciprocal tariffs. These are reciprocal tariffs, meaning if you want to say that America is wrong for doing this, you'd have to also say every other country is wrong for doing it to America. If you believe it's wrong, it's not just America that's wrong, it's every country on the face of the earth that's wrong. I believe actually there's only one country on the entire planet that did not have effectively, that we were not trading at a deficit with, basically. And so if you want to criticize America saying this is wrong, criticize everybody because everybody was doing it, and America's now just reciprocating. But this is what they say. He says, quote, the president is the ultimate deal maker because he uses every tool available. And Trump does. He says, although the decision takes away one tool, the IEEPA, it's just as Kavanaugh lays out in his dissent, it is ultimately a speed bump because the president can likely still end up roughly where he wants to go on tariffs using other legal authorities. But it will just take longer to get there. Trump actually just Hail Married them and did not take long to get there. He literally did it like in the same breath, which we'll get into in a minute. But this is what he says on the actual laws. Let me show you. He says, while the court has ruled the president cannot use IEEPA to implement tariffs, Congress has delegated similar authority. Meaning, remember, the key argument here is not that tariffs are illegal. The key argument is the president cannot act without Congress. Congress has to make the decision. And as they're noting here, while the Congress did not give the president the power under the IEEPA, they did do it under other rules. He says Congress has delegated similar authority via the Trade Act of 1974, notably sections 122, 201, and 301, and the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, section 232, and the Tariff Act of 1930, going back pretty far, section 338, and the Trading with the Enemy Act, which have more procedural hurdles to clear but can be used to make our international trade relationships freer, fairer, and more secure. In other words, Trump has 3 congressionally approved acts he can use at his will, and you're talking here, 5 different sections of those acts which are already legally clear, meaning Trump has the ability to do it. And guess what? Trump already did it. Literally in the same speech. He didn't even wait. This is what Trump is saying, and he pointed this out, and he made the announcement saying he's going to do it while noting the Supreme Court decision. He actually not only is saying he's going to keep doing it, he's actually expanding it. He says he's going to be imposing a 10% global tariff using what? He's using section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. Watch this.
In order to protect, and it says so, in order to protect our country, a president can actually charge more tariffs than I was charging in the past period of a year under the various tariff authorities. So we can use other of the statutes, other of the tariff authorities, which have also been confirmed and are fully allowed. Therefore, effective immediately, all national security tariffs under Section 232 and existing Section 301 tariffs, they're existing, they're there, remain in place, fully in place, and in full force and effect. Today, I will sign an order to impose a 10% global tariff under Section 122 over and above our normal tariffs already being charged. And we're also initiating several Section 301 and other investigations to protect our country from unfair trading practices of other countries and companies. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And I say quite simply, which I've said for a long time, make America great again. And interestingly, we've already made it great, so I don't have to use that, but I don't think we'll ever give up on MAGA. MAGA is always going to be with us.
Welcome back. All right, just checking the chat. Troy and M, yeah, Ashley, pretty distance. All right, I'm just checking the chat real quick. All right. I'm glad you're all liking the show. Thank you so much for being here. Jeffrey Barker says, since Republicans currently control the House and Congress, why do they not pass the laws on tariffs? So the issue they have, so the issue with Congress, because some people are saying, well, why doesn't Trump just work with Republicans? Because they have they literally control both chambers of Congress, the executive branch, the President Trump, and they kind of control the Supreme Court, although as we just saw, not fully. The courts are not supposed to be politically biased. The courts in, the Supreme Court does not always act in Trump's favor. So while you could say, yeah, liberal justice, conservative justice, it's not always that simple. To your point, though, asking, well, why doesn't Trump just, get Republicans in Congress to work with him? It's because of the filibuster. Trump has been asking them to get rid of the filibuster, especially with voting laws, especially with tariffs. He's saying, if you guys don't do this, we're going to bankrupt the country. He's been trying to get them to get rid of the filibuster when it comes to even approving his appointees. Trump still has not even fully formed his cabinet, which is kind of crazy because we're almost a year in now, or over a year in, yeah. And so it's the filibuster. The issue is the filibuster. And also on the point that Republicans don't always get along with each other. If you want to hear the real shortcoming between Republicans and Democrats is this. Democrats, when they get power, they tend to kind of go to extreme, and it kind of breaks the system because they get too extreme. Republicans start to fight each other. Republicans kind of don't get along with each other. It is kind of the nature, I think, of conservative. This is purely my analytical take, right? I think it's an issue of conservatism and liberalism. And if you want to know how I kind of define that, it's this. And look, I'm not against either. Like, the American system is founded on what you would call classical liberalism, like, Adam Smith and stuff like that, right? Classical liberalism is basically like, look, you do you, but don't try to tell me what my rights are and aren't. Like, don't try to take my rights away, and I'm not going to try to like morally police you as long as you're not doing things crazy that hurt other people. That's basically like the classical liberalism in a nutshell, right? It's nothing technically wrong with it. If you understand, though, like how we define this, liberalism is technically the definition of moving away from tradition. Technically, right? It's more of like a looseness or like a leniency. Conservatism means that you're holding on to like a value. You're holding on to a certain belief. That can be a good thing, that can be a bad thing. Some would argue that communist systems promote liberalism when trying to start revolution and take power because they're trying to undermine the incumbent system. And after they take power, they become ultra-conservative because they want to conserve their power, obviously. So they want chaos when they're seizing power. They want stability once they have successfully seized power. If you want to have a healthy system, you need to kind of have a good mix of being lenient and conservative. You need to have a bit of both. But when you take it to extremes, this is what it leads to. Liberalism, when taken to an extreme, means you basically have no standards. Like you have no foundation. There's no moral base, really. Only when taken to an extreme. Conservatism, when taken to an extreme, means you're kind of a jerk. You're like overly rigid. You moral police everybody. You're kind of a Karen. Okay, that's like when taken to an extreme. Are you letting your kid pick flowers and violating the community rules or something like that? That's like you're ultra conservative. And so when you take it to Congress, what do you have? Well, Democrats, when they get too much power, they tend to push it like to ultra-liberalism. They're like, well, great, let's gender transition all the kids, and if you say I'm wrong, well, I'm going to throw you in the gulag because, you misgendered me or something like that. And, they kind of do crazy things. They try to like reorganize all of society and push really wild do as thou wilt type laws. And they invert legality, where you are guilty not if you do whatever you want, but if you try to stop others from doing whatever the heck they want. They basically make conservatism illegal, where you try to say, well, you guys probably shouldn't do that. If you try to stop them from doing whatever they want, then that's the crime. Conservatives, when they take things to too much of an extreme, we haven't seen this in a long time. I don't think we've frankly even seen this like in America. You could say it would be like a totalitarian, like, okay, maybe you could say like conservatism to an extreme is like broken glass policing. Every single crime, every single infraction is punished to the ultimate extent of the law. Ultimate, legality, ultimate kind of rigidity, that would be taken to an extreme. We haven't really seen that. The most you could say is maybe broken glass policing. But the problem you have with conservatives is they tend to like not get along with each other. Whereas the left tends to have this saying of like never strike left, like Saul Alinsky talked about. They don't really attack each other. They tend to march in lockstep. They tend to like kind of go with like the furthest or most extreme, and they kind of set the rhythm. Republicans, conservatives don't do that. As soon as Republicans have power, they start fighting with each other. And you could say it's because Republicans, conservatives have a lot of different, they believe in, real modern American Republicans are more ironically like classical liberals, as crazy as that sounds. They're very different. You have libertarians, you have the MAGA types, you have the Ronald Reagan type Republicans, you have the QAnon Republicans, right? You have a good mix of them, and they don't always get along with each other. You have the guys who watch Tucker, you have the guys who watch Candace, you have the guys who watch Fox News, you have the guys who watch Daily Wire, the guys who watch Epoch Times, and we have a very different audience sometimes. And what you find is that when people start morally policing each other also, they're like, well, you did something wrong and I don't like you and I'm not going to work with you anymore or whatever else. And so they start infighting a lot. Republicans kind of sabotage themselves internally. And that's kind of the problem you have on their side, right? Democrats push things to too much of an extreme. Republicans start infighting. And this is kind of how they end up sabotaging themselves and why I think the pendulum keeps swinging back and forth, if you want to ask my take on it. Cassandra Olympiad, you said, didn't you once say, Josh, that the USA is technically is a fascist capitalism? Okay, I shouldn't say it that extreme. So if you were, okay, so this is my take on fascist capitalism, okay? Like, that's probably not the word I would use for it. I would actually say state interventionism. I'd say a mix of state interventionism, what do you call it? Syndicalism, meaning the unions have a lot of power, right? Which is kind of what you had under like Mussolini's fascism. It was what he had to a large extent. Mussolini-type fascism was huge syndicalism. Basically, the unions are the mafia, right? And then you have, of course, again, you could call it state interventionism, but basically a huge administrative state that basically rules by decree and micromanages businesses and interferes with the free market using interventionist policies. I would say the entire world right now, including most of Europe, including Canada, including Europe, including even a lot of these socialist governments, and including the United States, all practice what we would traditionally call a mixed model economy, which is varying degrees of state interventionism. Now, why do I compare state interventionism to fascism? It's because fascism and Nazism were seen as kind of the middle ground between capitalism and communism. I know it gets complicated because these terms are so like misused these days. They're extremely misused, but these are actual political policies, actual economic policies, and actual systems, not just names you call somebody on the street. The Nazi system had very clear economic policies, very clear business policies, and very clear government policies. And the model they had was somewhere in between American capitalism and Soviet Bolshevism. It was somewhere in the middle. It was what in the 1920s and 1930s would have been called a state interventionist mixed model economy. If you want to read some good books on this, read what's his name? Read Richard Pipes's what was it? The History of Bolshevism. I can't remember the name of it. I talk about it often. You can read a book called Planned Chaos by Ludwig von Mises. If you want my take, that is the best book you can read on it. If you have the patience and you want to read a very big book, read Socialism by Ludwig von Mises. And that will fully explain these concepts to you. Yeah, The History of Bolshevism by Richard Pipes goes into this as well. Also a very good book. My point is, if you want to talk about the actual economic policy in place right now, we do not actually practice free market capitalism in the United States. We practice it more than most countries. We practice it more than Canada. We practice it more than most of Europe. When people talk about the Nordic systems of socialism, it's mixed. Actually, they have easier rules on starting private businesses. We actually do, we in some ways are more socialist than some of the Nordic countries when it comes to like the ability to start a business. We're less socialist on maybe like the social welfare front in some regards. Although America, we actually pay more than I think any other country on social welfare. But we're not a purely free market capitalist country. We do practice a mixed model economy. And yes, you could call that socialism light. If you want to understand the spectrum of communism, and there's a lot in between, you would call it a mixed model economy. And yes, that is unfortunately closer to fascism or Nazism. But I'm not saying America's a Nazi country. I'm saying every country on earth is practicing that to an extent. Europe is not socialist purely. They're mixed model economies. And most of them would be closer to fascism, than they would be to like Bolshevism. And most of them would be closer. They're not free market capitalist countries. Again, they're closer to Nazism or fascism, as crazy as that sounds. Even the Chinese Communist Party, they practice quote unquote state capitalism. What is state capitalism? Well, socialism is state capitalism, but the mixed model economy they've practiced is somewhere between Nazism and Bolshevism. Like they're not fully like Bolshevik level, but they're not quite Nazi level. They're actually further along towards like the Bolshevik spectrum. But everybody practices somewhere in that spectrum. I know this stuff is kind of like misused all the time these days, and nobody talks about the real definitions because people just want to name call. But again, these are actual political systems, and so I'm not name calling when I say this, right? Anyways, welcome back again. The Trump administration is not just targeting criminal aliens and focusing on deportations. The administration, on another topic, is also working to denaturalize people who have defrauded the United States in the process of becoming citizens. They've already said they've denaturalized around 100,000 people, but they're also looking to stop people from taking advantage of the asylum system, which is also a lot of them. Also the H-1B system, but the asylum system is interesting. This is new. Let me show you this. Department of Homeland Security says this. The Department of Homeland Security, DHS, is proposing a rule to reduce the incentive for aliens to file fraudulent asylum claims so they can obtain work authorizations. And here's what they said. This is a DHS spokesperson. Quote, "For too long, a fraudulent asylum claim has been an easy path to working in the United States, overwhelming our immigration system with meritless applications." They say, quote, "We are proposing an overhaul of the asylum system to enforce the rules and reduce the backlog we inherited from the prior administration." They say aliens are not entitled to work while we process their asylum applications. The Trump administration is strengthening the vetting of asylum applicants and restoring integrity to the asylum and work authorization processes. Now let me just go a bit into this first. Okay, so what is the asylum system? Basically, I mean, America does not have to do this. It's very nice America does it, and frankly, I'm glad we do it because I know a lot of people who came here on asylum. This is if you're fleeing religious persecution, if you're fleeing political persecution, if your country is in a war and totally destabilized and you don't want to have your head cut off and thrown in a ditch somewhere, America does offer you, asylum. It's very nice of the American people to do this. Not all countries do it. Some countries, like Thailand, for example, you cross their border and you're like, hey, the government is going to kill me because, let's say they flee from China, for example, because I believe in like a banned form of Christianity or something like that. And, they already tore down my church and destroyed the cross and, threw my pastor in prison and I'm afraid for my life. Thailand might not accept you. They might say, well, sorry to hear, sorry, not sorry. It looks like you got to go back home because we don't have an asylum system. I'm not saying they would turn back that particular case, but they have done it on many occasions. You have some countries that do not offer this. You have some countries that have a cap on it. You have some countries that are total open doors. Everybody come in, like good old friendly Western Europe. America, Western Europe, Canada these days have very open asylum systems. Some countries are in the middle, like Australia's kind of in the middle. You can go and like escape on a little dinghy, braving the waves, and they'll turn your little dinghy right back to those dangerous waves and say, good luck, chap. Hope you make it okay. Like they'll literally do that to you, okay? Not all countries allow this. That being said, it is very nice of the American people to offer this. The United States has one of the most open asylum systems in the entire world. I have a lot of friends who are here on asylum. I know a lot of people. I know people who, if they were sent back to their countries, they would be killed by their government, without a doubt, or they'd be imprisoned. I know a lot of people who are fleeing persecution, obviously because I cover a lot of human rights stuff, right? Now, the problem you have, though, is because America is so open with it, a lot of people defraud it. This is also a very big problem. It's known. This is a known problem among many migrant communities. I can tell you, for example, like I know a lot of people obviously practice Falun Dafa, hugely persecuted in China, basically a belief in being a good person, you know, truthfulness, compassion, forbearance, like standards you hold yourself to, and that's how you practice, right? The government in China persecutes it. They literally harvest people's organs and torture you if you refuse to give up your religious belief. A lot of people flee. The problem is, while there are many, many horrible cases, torture, everything, you have a system where you have people who defraud it because they know that America will let you in if you say you're part of a persecuted group, and people try to scam it. It's terrible. Really is terrible. It's a serious wrong to the people who actually need it. Like the people who are legitimately fleeing persecution are really being wronged by the people who defraud it. It's really terrible that people defraud it. They're taking advantage not just of the goodness of the American people, they're taking advantage of people who, and undermining it for people who are actually risking being killed by their governments, you know? And so what happened under the Biden administration? Well, this, and even prior to that, you have these migrant caravans heading to the United States. You have NGOs who literally trained them on what to say when they turn themselves in to Customs, Border Enforcement, whatever, or National Guard. They tell them what to say so they can apply for asylum. And what they do is they discard their identities. I showed you, if you all saw my documentary, it's called Weapons of Mass Migration. You can watch it on Epoch TV, where I went to Mexico and Panama and everything else, investigating this whole thing and what's behind it. You might remember I showed you all like video of the ground on the Mexican side of the U.S.-Mexico border, literally covered with IDs, discarded IDs, passports, like identity papers, everything else like that. Why do they do that? It's because they're lying about where they come from so they can defraud the United States. They were lying. They had burn pits. I showed you a lot of the partially burned ID cards. It's crazy. And if you look at the actual IDs, what they show is this, because if you remember, we were actually going through the IDs and looking at it. You would have people who've been living in Chile, but they originally came from Haiti or Dominican Republic or something like that. And so because Chile would not be a country you could apply for asylum from, you know, while America was offering temporary protection status for Haitians, if a Haitian had been living in, you know, let's say Chile, Chile or Argentina or something like that, and that's not that would be a safe country, they would not be able to apply for asylum in the United States. And so what do? They discard the documentation showing that they were not residing in Haiti, even though they were from there originally. They're residing in another country, and they did not need asylum. They discard their IDs. They say, I'm from Haiti, and then they defraud the system. And so you have a lot of people who are defrauding the system. The Biden administration was offering temporary protection status to the people who are in the asylum process. And, you know, the problem you have is that we call them illegals. They were not technically illegal. Democrats were calling them undocumented. They were not technically undocumented. These were people who were technically given legal status, which is temporary protection status, while their asylum cases were being processed. While the asylum cases were being processed, they were also given probation. And so they were allowed to legally work. They were allowed to legally get social welfare and food stamps and Medicare and, you know, Medicaid and everything else. They were able to legally receive public benefits because they were given various forms of legal status. They were not undocumented. They were actually documented. And again, the problem is a lot of people were defrauding the system. Now, the problem that created was manyfold. On one side, that made it so you had suddenly like 10 million people defrauding the system. I mean, maybe not 10 million, let's say, I'm sure many of them were justifiable, right? But you had within the cases people who actually needed it and a significantly larger number of people who did not actually need it. You had a lot of people who were basically stealing food from the mouths of starving kids. You had a lot of people who were just cutting in line of the guy fleeing like the threat of death because his family had just been genocided in China. You know what I mean? Like you had these people who were just stealing from the people who actually needed it and robbing the American people. And so, you know, and it's really unfortunate because I do think the asylum system is a good thing. But we had it so open that a lot of people were taking advantage of it and defrauding Americans using it. So what is the government to do? Well, they're putting a much stronger system in place to actually vet this. Do you actually need it? Where do you actually come from? Were you residing in a safe third country, like you were from Haiti but you were living in Chile? You know, are you actually like a decent human being? Like, are you coming here just to live off the American people? Or, you know, are you just going to come here and go on food stamps? Or do you actually plan to like pull your own weight and be a decent human being? Do you plan on coming here and actually conforming to society? Like, do you want to learn English and become part of our society? Or do you just want to, you know, basically take advantage of America and do your own thing? Like, you know, what kind of a person are you? All of this is being taken into consideration now. You know, in other words, are you actually grateful to this country? Or do you think you're entitled to this? Like, you know, you need to have some gratitude if someone's saving your life. You know what I mean? So here's what they're saying. If you come here now, even if you apply for asylum, they're saying you do not have the right to work, which is going to be difficult for people to stay here, by the way, even if they're on asylum. If they get rid of the fat, the people defrauding it, the people who are taking advantage of it, they're going to be able to process the cases faster, which is a good thing, right? Because the wait list, you're going to have to wait like 10 years before your asylum case is ever heard sometimes. They say this: applications for employment authorization based on a pending asylum application have reached a historic high, straining U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, resources. Nearly every illegal alien attempts to exploit the system by applying for asylum. Just crazy. Like, they're all, because it's so open, they're saying that nearly every single illegal alien tries to apply for asylum in order to stay here. Just crazy. The Trump administration has actually been noting country by country how many people have come here. You have some countries in Latin America where like 10% of their population has migrated to the United States. Like Ecuador, Cuba, like a couple of the ones they mentioned. You have some countries where like a quarter of their country's GDP is just remittances of people working here and then siphoning the money and sending it back to their countries. They note Ecuador, for example, it's roughly a quarter of the country's GDP is just remittances. That means the money you pay them does not circulate within the economy. It flows outward. It's like a locust system. And they like suck the blood of the nation and send it elsewhere. If you want to have a functioning economy, you need to have a circular system. You need to have it flowing within the body. It's like your arteries are being cut and your blood is spraying out. If you want to have an economy, you need to have where people make money and they pay the money within the economy so it goes to other people in the economy, not to another economy. And so because they've allowed this, it's just siphoning out American jobs, siphoning out American wealth, and we're propping up the economies of entire countries. That's what they're saying. They note that USCIS currently has more than 1.4 million pending affirmative asylum claims, which is equal to the entire population of the state of New Hampshire. They say the rule, if finalized, would reduce the incentive to file frivolous, fraudulent, or otherwise meritless asylum claims by changing filing and eligibility requirements for aliens requesting employment authorization based on a pending asylum application. You need to show, in other words, that you're like a legitimate if you want to keep this. They say the agency would focus more on its finite resources on reviewing pending asylum applications, including backlog cases and other pending applications and petitions, and allow our asylum system to prioritize those actually seeking refuge from danger. Now, is this perfect? I don't know. I actually personally know some people who were like legitimately here on asylum who actually were denied. They're not being sent back to their country. They're going to places like Canada. Like they're going to like other countries that are like kind of safe still, or that are safe still. And so like even if America denies their asylum, they're not being sent back to wherever they came from. They can go and try to apply elsewhere, is the way it's being set up. So we'll have to see, right? Will innocent people, will people who are legitimately in need of it be harmed by this? Yeah, there probably will be some. But I think the Trump administration is saying the problem is too big to be sustainable right now. And so they're looking at to make it tighter. Another topic, though, Trump ran into some controversies with the MAHA movement, right? Make America Healthy Again. And this is over a dispute on pesticides and herbicides. And now RFK Jr. is stepping in to give his position and is explaining how keeping some of these chemicals fits in with the broader MAHA plan. We'll be talking more about this, though, after we come back from a quick break.
All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Philipp. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back. All right, just going over some of the comments. Seymour, you're saying, Seymour Butts, thank you. You're saying Mexican restaurant owners hire young illegal women, pay them in cash, and take their SNAP benefits to buy the chicken and beef they sell at their restaurants. I have heard cases of that. I wouldn't say it's like every single Mexican restaurant is doing that. Like, I don't think you're suggesting that. But I'm aware that unfortunately people do exploit, illegal immigrants for work. The real irony is that's kind of one of the arguments why people want it. Like you've had politicians be like, well, if you deport the illegals, who's going to pick the strawberries? Who's going to pick the oranges? Who's going to pick the cotton? They're literally saying stuff like this, which is kind of crazy. The suggestion being they take the jobs people don't want, they're willing to work for less money, and farmers pay them less because, they're not on the books, and you pay them under the table. Is that good for us? No, absolutely not. It actually messes with the standards it messes with competition. So it means that if you're going to apply for a job somewhere and they're paying the under-the-table illegal alien worker $15 an hour, and they want to pay you, well, what do you think they're going to pay you? You're competing for employment with people who work under the table. They don't pay taxes. Not some of them do, but not a lot of them do not. If they want to file taxes, they have to be, they have to steal someone's social security number, right? But like some of the big construction businesses will force that, but a lot of small businesses do not, right? If they want to get a job working at these big construction companies in Manhattan, they have to steal someone's social security number, which they do. There's entire facilities set up for it. But if they want to go work at the local restaurant or work in like the production area of it, yeah, they're going to work under the table. So what does that mean? It means if you're like a student or you're getting out of college or you just need work and you want to apply for a job, who are you competing with? Let's say there's 3 applications. There's you, There's some other guy down on his luck, and there's an illegal alien willing to work under the table for $15 an hour. What do you think that business is going to offer to pay you? Probably $15 an hour. You have to pay taxes, they don't. They can bid below cost because they're not on the books. So it actually really messes things up. They keep wages low because of that. Now you could say they also keep prices low because businesses have less, they don't have to pay as much. But you could also say that high taxation is then justified because, well, if you have 10 million workers, let's say 1 million workers getting paid under the table and they don't pay taxes, it means that you and everybody else who pays taxes has to pay more taxes because so many jobs are not basically having the function of taxes, right? They're not being taxed. The money's being sent to other countries through remittances. It also means that less purchasing power is in the country because like a quarter of a foreign economy is being propped up with it because they're sending money home. So less tax revenue means you have to shoulder the difference. More population means actually government needs more tax revenue for the services. So they don't have enough money to pay for services, meaning they need to charge more taxes, but there's less tax revenue coming in because so many workers are under the table. It means the average worker then has to pay more taxes, accept lower pay, and have less business based on the amount of money flowing in the economy because so much is flowing outward. For a country, this is a very bad thing. This is a horrible economic policy. Now you could argue, well, heck, we get cheaper cotton and strawberries. The reality of a free market economy is this. The businesses would adjust their pay based on what people are willing to, do the job for. And if the strawberry business is not sustainable based on American labor, well, we buy it from Mexico. We buy it from another country. We buy it from a country where the people coming here to do it would go back to their country and do it based on their wages. That's actually one of the reasons why you have international trade, is if you can get something cheaper somewhere else. If it's not economically sustainable within the United States, someone's going to do it, or someone's going to innovate and find a cheaper way to do it because people want their strawberries, or people want their avocados, or people want their, cotton jeans. You know what I mean? There are other economies will emerge in order to offset that. And the farmers who used to do it here will then either adjust or innovate or plant different crops. And that's the way a free market works. You know what I mean? On another topic though, back to the stories. Trump has actually been running into some controversies within his own party. In particular, the MAHA movement, the Make America Healthy Again. There was a dispute over pesticides and herbicides. Basically, Trump came out and kind of defended some of the pesticide community. And this was a big deal because RFK Jr. was pointing out, hey, this stuff is poisoning us. Now, some people in the MAHA community were noting, well, geez, you've been saying you want to get rid of harmful chemicals. You've been saying you want to get rid of things that are actually literally poisoning us in our food. And at the same time, you're saying we need to keep it. There actually is a gray area here. There actually is a middle ground, and there's actually a logic to it. On that point, RFK Jr., the head of the MAHA movement, stepped in and gave his position. And he actually said something very interesting. He noted why Trump is having to keep some of these pesticides and herbicides. And he's noting how that policy ties in with the broader agenda for the MAHA movement. Basically, he's saying this is a temporary thing, but you can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. If you want to get rid of this right now, we would not have enough food. You'd have a famine, is what he's saying. Let me show you this. RFK Jr. on X wrote this: I will always tell the American people the truth. Pesticides and herbicides are toxic by design, engineered to kill living organisms. Obviously, pesticides are meant to kill the bugs. Herbicides are meant to kill the weeds. If you eat pesticides or herbicides, you're eating something that is meant to kill a living organism, meaning it's probably not good for you. He notes this, quote, when we apply them across millions of acres and allow them into our food system, we put Americans at risk. Chemical manufacturers have paid tens of billions of dollars to settle cancer claims linked to their products. And many agricultural communities report elevated cancer rates and chronic disease. But here's the caveat to that. He says, unfortunately, our agricultural system depends heavily on these chemicals, meaning they're not good for us, but we're in a situation as we currently speak where we can't really get out of it just yet. He says, quote, the U.S. represents 4% of the world's population, yet we use roughly 25% of its pesticides. That's crazy. He says if these inputs disappeared overnight, crop yields would fall, food prices would surge, and Americans would experience a massive loss of farms even beyond what we are witnessing today. He says the consequences would be disastrous, meaning you'd have mass crop failure. Anybody who's worked in gardening or farming knows some unfortunate truths. Some of the chemical fertilizers kind of destroy your soil. And the problem is, like, if you plant like certain GMO seeds, they kind of need that like chemical soup soil or fertilizer. There are certain types of, like, it's products, right? There are certain types of pesticides that work well with certain types of like chemical fertilizer. There's certain types of herbicides you use. And great, you're going to get a lot of crops, fantastic. But it's kind of growing out of this weird chemical soup. Like, I'm not saying it's bad for you. Like, you're not going to die from eating it. I don't think so. But it's probably not the best for you either. Like, you're eating organic, you're probably a little better off. And I know even the organic label has some loopholes with it. It's really unfortunate. Anybody who's eaten a farm-grown, home-grown tomato knows they taste a lot different than what you buy in the supermarket. Anybody who's gone like pure gardening, full organic, soil restoration, mulching, the whole 9 yards knows you feel like $100,000, you feel like $1 million. You feel fantastic compared to eating like GMO chemical soup food all the time. Like, you feel a lot better. The problem is, while we do have a good amount of food and it's not the best for us, we also don't have famine. We also don't really have mass starvation. They're saying, well, so many people are starving in America. Yeah, but you can get free food pretty dang easy, right? We actually do have a lot of resources for food in America. Probably starvation is the least of your problems. I know there are statistics undermining this. We have so many government programs for food stamps and food drives and food halls and churches doing it. If you're not getting that, it's because you're not putting in the effort, frankly. It's very easy to get, okay? Ironically, the ones struggling the most are probably like poor working families who are not eligible for those things. That's the real irony of it. But they're saying if we wanted to go full organic right now, it wouldn't be sustainable. You would actually have a lot of crop failures. We would have a lot of crops destroyed. Food would cost a lot more and we wouldn't have enough food, frankly. Which is why RFK Jr. is saying the consequences of doing that like immediately would be disastrous. So he says this: I support President Trump's executive order to bring agricultural chemical production back to the United States and end our near total reliance on adversarial nations. Basically, we've been importing it from other countries. We don't have it here. The other reality is, like it or hate it, chemical fertilizers, we kind of need them because of the hole we've dug ourselves. We also get them from other countries, and if those other countries wanted to starve us to death, they just cut off the supply. And so Trump is saying, bring it home, bring it to America. RFK Jr. says his executive order protects two pillars of our national strength: our defense readiness and our food supply. By the way, real brief, my new show, the Josh Philipp Show, if you're on YouTube or on Epoch TV, check it out. It's a brand new show I'm doing once a week every Thursday. I actually investigated the threats to our food supply, in particular China buying up farmland. I actually went boots on the ground in some areas, did some on-the-ground reporting. If you haven't watched that, check it out. I did a very in-depth report on it. I think you'll really like it. But it's true that food security is as important as like national defense. Having a good food supply is as important as having a military. Maybe even more so, because you can live a little longer without having a military than you do without food. You need to have a food supply to survive. And if we let other countries control it, that's very dangerous. RFK Jr. says when hostile actors control critical inputs, they directly threaten the security of the American people. He says the Trump administration will secure those supply chains to eliminate that vulnerability. Which, if you read between the lines, Trump is doing this on a lot of fronts. It actually makes me wonder if they know something we don't know. They're actually closing a lot of loopholes for foreign reliance on medications. Let's be blunt. Reliance on China for medications, for them buying up our farmland, for them controlling rare earth minerals, for them controlling a lot of manufacturing, for them controlling our, a lot of our agriculture when it comes to even buying up some major companies, and when it comes to importing, fertilizers. And if we let them control it, basically they're holding our life in their hands. If they want to kill us, they just cut it off, frankly. So they say President Donald Trump did not build our current system. He inherited it. For decades, Washington designed modern agriculture. Policymakers wrote farm policies, directed research dollars, structured subsidies and crop insurance, and shaped commodity markets to reward monocultures and maximum yield. Obviously, we need more food. He says those deliberate choices locked farmers into chemical dependence and prioritize short-term output over long-term soil vitality and human health, which is really interesting. This is something I want to do something more in depth on in the future, which is soil restoration. The problem you have with these chemicals, yes, they're bad for you. They're not good for you. But if you want to go cold turkey, it's like taking a heroin addict and making him and cutting off his supply day one. He's going to go into withdrawals, he's going to convulse, and he's going to die. The plants will do the same thing. Plants in soil, unfortunately, develop chemical dependencies. And if you want to go cold turkey, pure chemical to pure natural day one, you're going to have mass crop failures. You have to wean them into it. You have to actually do soil restoration. And so what RFK Jr. is saying, that is the long-term goal. They want to get the chemical dependence issue fixed by doing soil restoration. So he says this: we're changing course without destabilizing the food supply. He says, alongside USDA and Secretary Rollins, we're accelerating the transition to regenerative agriculture by expanding farming systems that rebuild soil, increase biodiversity, improve water retention, and reduce reliance on synthetic chemicals, including pre-harvest desiccation. He says we are also driving the rapid adoption of next-generation technologies, including laser-guided weed control, which you've seen, by the way. It's like they roll this thing over the crops, and they like have AI, and they zap bugs. Like they hit them with lasers. It's kind of crazy. He says, and they do it for weeds as well, by the way. He says electrothermal and electrical systems, robotics, precision mechanical cultivation, and biological controls that replace blanket spraying with precision intervention. This is going to be important because immediate cost is higher, long-term cost will be lower, and long-term benefit is higher. You could actually have basically legitimately purely organic crops without the crop loss you would have from these types of issues. It would actually be a fantastic thing. But the initial cost would be higher because you have to buy the machines. But RFK Jr. says these solutions are not theoretical. Farmers are already putting them to work. Markets are scaling them. Now the federal government will act with urgency to expand their reach and accelerate adoption nationwide. It should be very interesting because why do things cost a lot of money? Supply and demand. Low supply, high demand. A lot of technologies actually, a lot of new innovations in technologies actually start off as luxury goods. But as the luxury becomes popular, the production of them increases and prices go down, and they then become more affordable. It's in this way that the automobile, right, modern cars, the automobile, the horseless carriage, used to be a luxury good. Only the wealthiest could afford the old horseless carriage. Because it became in so high demand, manufacturers increased production to meet demand. Some found demand was high enough where they could cut costs, free market competition, they're undercutting each other, and they end up creating an affordable vehicle. It is through this way that luxury goods turn into mass market goods. And if the Trump administration can find the same way of doing that with these technologies for farmers, where the demand for it is high enough to necessitate mass production, it means that the companies manufacturing can actually charge a lot less, which is a fantastic thing. And if the government wants to subsidize farms and move towards this, great. I mean, I tend to be against government subsidies. I'm not absolute on this. I think if the government wanted to subsidize modern farming technology to help us, get off of chemical soup soil, fantastic. It would be so good for all of us, in my personal take. B. Douglas, can't wait to buy certified laser-grown produce. That'd be pretty funny, actually. Actually traveling to like Taiwan and South Korea, you find actually hydroponics are really popular in a lot of other countries. There are some really innovative ways people are doing farming in other countries, where you have high populations, huge demand for food, and not a lot of land, not a lot of arable land. And so they go vertical. They do like tents, and they put it in tents so you don't have the issue of insects, at least not as much. There are really innovative ways you can grow pure, high quality, good crops that distance us from the way we've been doing it for a long time. And so I think it's a great idea. And I'm big on this stuff. I grew up hunting. I grew up actually I've lived off grid with my dad as a kid. My dad used to be a big surfer. We go down to Costa Rica and we were totally off grid. We redirected a river. We had full functioning plumbing. We had like a 5-tiered septic system that was like you could flush your toilets just fine and no issue. The secret, by the way, is you don't use bleach toilet paper. If you all want the secret, because the bleach kills the enzymes. It kills the good bacteria for the breakdown of stuff and the chemical compounds. And then you plant banana trees on top because they purify it. Pro tip for survivalists out there. We had like rainwater showers. We had sustainable land. We had trees growing where you could basically live off the land, go fishing, and you didn't have to buy anything. It was fantastic. Like I grew up like that. So if you ask me, that's a great way to live. I don't think it's totally sustainable where people are like all living off their own little piece of land. I do think having, restaurants and farms and, businesses is still good. But personally, I know what it's like to live very healthy off the land. And I think it's great. I'm a big supporter of home farms. I'm a big supporter of gardening. I'm a big supporter of hunting, actually. I think this is a fantastic way to live. I grew up fishing just about every weekend. Go get them. I love this stuff. And so while I'm typically against state interventionism and subsidies, frankly, if it is used to, jumpstart our farming systems and get them up to date, that is one thing I believe governments have done throughout human history, going back to Joseph and the Dreamcoat. And him having visions of crop failures, and good old Pharaoh putting grain in giant silos so they didn't starve to death when a famine hit. I'd say preventing famine, government support for farmers is not socialism. It is one of the most traditional roles of food security and protecting your population that has existed going back literally thousands of years. And I think if America does it using modern technology, all for the better. I hope they do it, personally. All right, everyone, that said, it's going to be getting a bit late in the day. Join me again on Thursday for another great episode of Crossroads. Thank you all so much for being here. Also, check out my new show. Be sure to check it out. The Josh Philipp Show. Not Joshua Philipp, the Josh Philipp Show. Search for it on YouTube. Click the link in the description. Also, if you haven't noticed, we are demonetized by YouTube. We've been demonetized since 2021. So, if you want to put food on my table, consider donating. I have DonorBox. We use DonorBox for this. So if you want to donate to Crossroads or even make a recurring donation like $1, $2, 25 cents, it actually is very much appreciated. This is, again, just the generosity of all of you. I know some of you have donated. Thank you so much. Your support keeps this show going. If you want to donate to keep my work going, check out the DonorBox link in the chat. We will link that. So thank you again so much. Thank you for your support. And I'll see you again on Thursday. In the meantime, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.